Good afternoon. Bill is always too kind to me. I have the honor to introduce our keynote speaker for the afternoon, but I was here this morning and I just wanted to say a few things what Bill missed in the interim between the politics. I actually had a real job, not that Richard Delaney would agree, but I worked for Coastal Zone Management from 1978 until 1993 when Clinton asked me to come and head up the regional FEMA office here in New England. So for 3.5 years, I worked under the Clinton administration with FEMA, and the preparation was incredible because of the 16 years that I spent in Coastal Zone Management. I always harken back to that January day in 1977, 78, when I sat, I think it was out there, as a Boston police officer and watched the blizzard of 78 roll in. And I was with Station 11 out of Fields Corner, and I said, well, like most officers, big storm, did my duty, sat out on the coast, and and rode home, only to have to walk back to Fields Corner to work for the next 10 days for a blizzard that was in 5 feet of snow, and told me something about the environment. Don't take it for granted. Of course, after the blizzard, I quickly left police service and went into something I thought would be easier. Only because they said, working for the state, you wouldn't work so hard. Well, they never worked for Coastal Zone Management because in 1978, it was a group of very, I think, young and energetic and committed young men and women who wanted to see change in our environment. And I think that was a period of time when change was really important and progress was important and the environment was an issue. In the 1976, they passed the Coastal Zone Management Act, and this state, Massachusetts, Act was a leader. Massachusetts worked with 5 other states, I think 6 other states, to get them certified as certified coastal zone management states. But our leadership came out of California, who was doing it decades. The Coastal Commission of California was setting the trend about what the rest of the world should be doing. I was lucky because I got to read their stuff because I was an EPA fellow back at the School of Design. So in '72, I'm saying, there are people doing something, but not here at home. So when I came back to CZM, it was a blessing. And to a large extent, it prepared me for what the next 35, 40 years has been, which is a challenge. The challenge is looking at change that's happening every day that we seem not to understand. We don't get it. Some of us get it. Some of us are trying. They're out there, in Providence Coastal Center and Boston Harbor Associates. I mean, when they got started, but the fight for Boston Harbor Hotel and the other hotels and people who wanted to build on the water's edge, we were telling them then in 1980, don't do it. So, I mean, when we were paying for the photographer to fly over from Salem State, who was laying on his belly in the fixed-wing, single-engine aircraft, taking pictures, digitizing the coastline so we could tell them about sea level rise, everybody was saying, well, maybe. As a New Yorker, I can tell you if people had paid attention to what we said then, the situation from Sandy would have been mitigated. I don't remember people building south of Atlantic Avenue in Bay Ridge, in the other areas that were inundated, in Jones Beach areas. I mean, from Brooklyn, I can tell you, when it used to flood, Pennsylvania Avenue used to flood in Brooklyn. That's in the 60s. In the 70s and 80s, it doesn't change. Today, I'm going to bring you a speaker that I'm very proud to introduce, Dale Morris, only because he comes from a place that I've learned to revere. My 4 years at NATO, working with SCEPSI, the Senior Civil Emergency Planning Committee, gave me an opportunity to do what I think Clinton said to do, work with the developing nations coming out of Russia and some of the other countries that were members of NATO at the time to get them to understand civilian response to disasters and to sort of mitigate disasters, because under the leadership of Bill Clinton and directly by my boss, James Lee Witt, who was a former disaster manager in Arkansas, I understood that mitigation is better than repair. Mitigation is better than recovery, better than response, that if you can get there and try to prevent it and plan ahead, which is what my background is, then you're going to do a lot more for the economy. So as we said earlier, if we had mitigated these challenges, we probably spent more in building our economy in a better way. And so the best example was that in 1995, we were doing a training exercise in New Orleans. And in the middle of the exercise, it changed from a training exercise to a live event in New Orleans. Now, we know if you build a place below water's level, you're going to have a problem. But the response was, though, the leadership. Of the staff members that were there at the senior level, James Lee Witt fired 9 of them because they came to the training exercise, and when we moved from exercise to real play, they were not prepared to do their job. And he relieved them of their responsibility. Now, it sounds harsh, but it's about mitigation. It's about being prepared. It's about planning ahead and taking what you do seriously. And I can say this, CZM and the agencies that I've worked for and the people like Bill Golden, they take this seriously, and he will always be prepared because he's looking towards the future. I'm proud to introduce Mr. Morris for 2 reasons. One, we're countrymen. He didn't know it, but we both come from the same country. My father's from a place called Curaçao, which is still a colony of the Netherlands, and we're subjects of the Queen. I'm good with it because the whole time I was in Brussels for the 4.5 years there, I spent all my time in Rotterdam and, in Amsterdam and the North Sea Jazz Festival in Den Haag. He'll explain it to you later maybe about why Amsterdam is so much fun, but it's a beautiful country. But what we've learned and what I was able to learn in working at the Port of Rotterdam to see how they prepared in the emergency management issues, how they prepared and worked with their coastal communities and the surrounding neighborhoods, how they prepared and set up, the whole process for emergency response and things, and how government integrated with private sector and things of that nature is the way we need to be going. What we need to go back to what we did under the first Dukakis one, where we had an A95 process. So at any time there was a major program, all the agencies in the state would respond to it, and they had a certain period of time. And if you didn't respond in that time, to determine whether or not it was a major project and it needed, environmental impact review, then the project moved on. And that mitigates the problem of things being held up by, the Army Corps and other people, because we have to move on with the business of securing, making commerce work, but keeping our environment strong. So I'm going to read you a little something about Mr. Morris, but I think he belies the real reason why we need to hear from the Netherlands. They get it. They've gotten it for a long time. So if you think of New Amsterdam, you guys call it New York. That was the Dutch. If you want to give some credit to why you're here in a protected harbor, the Mayflower was paid for by the Dutch Trading Company. All over the world, if you go someplace and you hear French spoken, and you may hear some German, and you may hear a lot of English, if you listen carefully, you will hear the older people speaking Dutch because they understood trade and commerce, and for years, they actually went out and integrated themselves in the communities of all these nations around the world. Hence, you're still stuck with 4 islands, and they got Manhattan. You'll work it out. But hear from them because they've started, returning land to the ocean. They started tunnels and gateways. They've, in a sense, learned to utilize the resources. They make this process work, and we always refer to Netherlands as Holland, but the Port of Holland is a pretty active port. But if you really want to have a good time, you go to Rotterdam. Dale Morris is a senior economist at the Royal Netherlands Embassy in Washington, D.C., providing economic and political analysis of U.S. macroeconomics, fiscal and monetary policy, as well as the U.S. federal budget, tax, and appropriation development. Morris directed the Dutch government's water management network in Louisiana, Florida, and California, where the focus is on the broad array of sustainability topics: flood protection, flood risk mitigation, coastal restoration, water supply conveyance, ecosystems, resiliency, climate change, adaptation, and landscape design for risk reduction. Morris is a co-director of the Dutch Dialogue. Morris is previously served as the legislative director and press secretary to 2 members of the U.S. Congress and was responsible for budget, tax, trade, appropriations, entitlements, and energy and environmental issues. Now, that says a lot, but what's most important, he comes from a nation that has gotten it right. There's one more footnote to history. While we want to thank the president who was smart enough to purchase Louisiana, I have to give credit to Toussaint Louverture, who made them the French sell it. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis, and thank you, Bill. And thank you all for agreeing to listen to me for a few minutes here after lunch. I hope I can keep you awake. The two worst speaking roles are right after lunch and right before the event ends, so I got this one. I'm going to try to keep you awake. One thing I wanted to do, there's a quote in the program today, it's from JFK, it says, "Change is the law of life," and this represents, I think, a lot what the Dutch have done over the years. 800 years of living with water, 800 years of trying to live in a dangerous landscape. And other people will say in a few minutes, 800 years of mistakes, and the Dutch will acknowledge that too. They have learned how to live the way they do in this dangerous environment because they've made mistakes and then moved on. And I'll talk about some of that. Garrett Graves is a friend, and interesting little tidbit about Garrett. Garrett had worked on the Hill for a number of years, and in late 2007, Garrett made a decision that he was going to go to Washington State to become an outfitter with his wife and go up and down the rivers and hike and kayak and raft. And Bobby Jindal called him. And you can see what Garrett's done. Garrett has transformed a very inefficient state bureaucracy in Louisiana that is now on the cutting edge of making that place safe and showing a lot of the country what to do. And we all have a higher calling, and Garrett is a good example of how one person can make a difference. And so if all of us try to make such a difference, we'll have a big impact on this very important topic. And I'm an economist, and see that we all know there is no such thing as a free lunch. With hazard mitigation, risk reduction, you pay now or you pay later. And we all know that it's cheaper to pay in advance. Insurance is cheaper than reparations afterwards. So keep that in mind as we go forward. What I want to do today, if I have time, I have my watch in front of me so I don't talk too long. I want to talk about the Netherlands, its geography, how it's adapted, where it's going in the future, and how that relates to its past practices. Multifunctional infrastructure, we've heard about that. I'm going to show you some examples and some PPPs, public-private partnerships, on how that's working in the Netherlands. Resources are restricted or resources are hard to come by in the Netherlands too, so you need to find ways to develop infrastructure where the private sector can pitch in and they derive benefit from it. The economic model works. I'm going to show you some of that. The joke here is, how can we help the Dutch not move to Germany because they don't want to. Al Gore, in his film about a decade ago, said that they would, and they're here to tell you they're not. And if I have time, I'll show you some of the projects, collaborations we have going on in the U.S. And the gentleman from BCDC showed a little project we have. We have a number of these projects elsewhere. So first thing we need to talk about, so the Netherlands, where it is, there it is, up on the terminus of the northwestern European plain. Americans are great at geography, except when you get sort of 2 streets away from where they live. So the Netherlands, the Dutch are not Danish. The capital of the Netherlands is not Copenhagen. All those things. The capital is Amsterdam, and the seat of government's in The Hague, and Rotterdam is the most important economic asset in the country, the port of Rotterdam. So it's right there. Just sort of start there. It's a delta landscape penetrated by rivers, subject to both coastal as well as riverine flooding. The cross-section you see there on the left diagram shows a strong coastal dune, which is integral to the Dutch flood protection system. And behind it is a subsiding peat-dominated landscape. Areas in the peat areas are anywhere between 8 feet to 21 feet below sea level, so it's pretty risky. Fills up like a bathtub. I'm going to show you that. What you see on the right-hand side is a picture of the Netherlands, what it would look like without flood protection. So there you have it. A lot of rivers in the Netherlands. 60% of the land is at or below sea level. That means if you would do nothing, it would flood. So you have to do something. 17 million people, so not inconsequential. 9 million of those people live at or below sea level. So they feel pretty safe there too. It's important to sort of understand that they don't feel at risk. They know the Dutch government is working for them to keep them safe. About 70% of Dutch GDP is produced in those low-lying areas. That's an important example for folks in the California Bay Delta, which is also below sea level, folks in Louisiana, and folks along certain places in the United States, which is at or below sea level. You can live in these places safely if you mitigate the risk properly. One of the things that's a very intricate water management system, one of the things that is threatening the Netherlands right now is climate change. The climate is changing. There are these longer term impacts. They're expecting higher storm surges. They're expecting wetter weather in the winter, heavier river discharges. So when the snow melts in the Alps, it has to get out to the North Sea through the Netherlands. It is subsiding, which increases your risk. And in the last, there's a Dutch spelling there. No, good, I spelled drought right. In the last 10 years, there have been 3 years of periodic drought in the wet Netherlands. And if you look at the IPCC reports, they're anticipating more drier weather in the Netherlands. The last levee failure in the Netherlands occurred during a drought because the clay-capped levees desiccated, and the little bit of pressure on the levee then caused the levee to shift, and now the whole area in a dry period was under higher flood risk. So climate change is challenging in the Netherlands. Sea level rise, it's manageable. 1 to 2 feet, 1 to 2.5 feet between now and 2100. This is much lower than a lot of places on the East Coast, what the projections for the East Coast. So the Dutch have an easier problem to solve in some ways. And I'm here to tell you that water management is not only a matter of national survival, it's an opportunity. I'm going to show you. It's an opportunity to live more closely with water and to benefit from all the things that come by living. I mean, Boston is along the water, New York's along the water, San Francisco's along the water for a reason. And you can deal with these things. So you take advantage of these opportunities. Just a little slide there showing more what the Netherlands look like underwater. Here's just a progression of images looking from south to north. The gray areas are built-up areas. The green areas farming or recreational areas. And here the deep blue is what would happen at the deepest levels. That's water. So as you would increase the water levels, or if you have a flood and it would start to flow through the country at 15 feet or 16 feet below sea level, this is what would flood at 12 feet or 4 meters. There you go. Go back here. Look up to the top here. Whoops, sorry. Okay, I can't. Anyway, at the top here, you'll watch this whole polar disappear. That's at 3 levels, or 3 meters below sea level, 2 meters below sea level, 1 meter below sea level. So the Netherlands, as we know it, has stopped to exist. And this is mean sea level right now. Sea level rise of 1 meter is going to do that to the Netherlands without any changes. So you have a tremendous amount of risk here. The Dutch do have to move to Germany if they don't deal with this. And the Netherlands has had a history of floods, 1 major flood every 100 years on average over the last since about 1200. The images are on the right-hand side of the last major flood in 1953. 1,800 people died. 1,800 people died, and the Netherlands was just recovering from World War II. Pretty poor country, and major impact. The Dutch in the 1900s decided they needed to shorten the coastline. Up on the top, you'll see the open sea arm, which was the old IJssel sea arm, the Southern Sea, as they call it. It was open to North Sea storm surge, North Sea currents and waves. In 1916, a major flood destroyed Amsterdam, parts of Amsterdam, and other part of the places around that sea arm, so they closed it off. And in fact, with the major enclosure dike, this enclosure dike is right now at the end of its useful life, and they're deciding now what to do with it. But what they did, in fact, was increase the protection by shortening the coastline. So as opposed to having 300 kilometers of something to protect, now they have 45. Same thing after the 53 flood, a major set of barriers and locks and structures to close off the Delta Sea arms. The one image on the bottom left or the bottom right is the Eastern barrier put in place in 1986. And the other is the Maasland barrier in Rotterdam, put in place in 1997. This is the major thing that's protecting the Dutch Delta from coastal storm surge, and the entire amount of landscape they have to protect now was shortened from 750 kilometers to 50 kilometers. So a lot of efforts going on here. Strong coastal spine. You have to keep your systems open, but you need to have the protection. And this is a 40-year-long project. It's not done simply, not done without design and not done without some redesign, because the barrier here with the white pillars going up, that was designed to be a closed system. Environmental movement sort of took off in the Netherlands in the early 1970s, as it did here. They realized they're going to destroy the entire delta ecosystem, so they redesigned the barrier to make it open, and it doubled its cost. Not something you do easily, but it had to be done. In fact, that barrier has paid for itself many times over because it closes once every, on average, once every 2 years. So it's doing something. Very high flood protection standards, a never again mentality, certainly post 1953. They have a risk assessment model. They assess their levees every 6 years. Every piece of the flood protection infrastructure is assessed every 6 years. A report goes up to Parliament, and the Parliament is mandated to provide the funding to repair the deficiencies in the system comparing to the mandated legal standards. And that's a crucial thing. There's not a decision if the money is going to be released. The money has to be funded in the next budget cycle or next 2 budget cycles. And cost benefit analysis is done for every piece of infrastructure, and they've just updated that model, the cost benefit analysis model, and it won the Franz Edelman Award, major, very prestigious award last year. And I'll tell you a little bit about that when I get to the Delta Commission. One thing that we need to make clear here, the Netherlands has an easier problem to solve than folks along the U.S. Gulf Coast have. A 1 in 10,000 year storm in the Netherlands, that's the highest level of protection you have, 1 in 10,000 year types of storm protection against, is probably equal to a 1 in 500 year storm along the East Coast. So 1 in 10,000 shouldn't scare you. It's doable in the U.S. too. After all this build out, the Dutch thought they're very safe, but really they have ongoing problems. You have subsidence, which is ongoing. Some of it's geological uptilt in the eastern part of the country, so that's forcing the western part of the country to subside more. You have mining and natural gas mining and salt mining up in the north, which is also causing some subsidence. And you have the peat oxidation in the most densely part of the Netherlands. So you have an ongoing problem which requires this very intricate water supply drainage. You have a summer system where you're trying to put the water back into the system, so you keep the groundwater levels high so you don't subside as quickly, but you have to be able to pump it out in the winter quickly. So you have this very intricate system, and the pumps and the water boards manage the lever to manage the water levels throughout the Dutch landscape to a 1 centimeter area. So when a storm's coming, they pump it down. When they know wet weather or dry weather's coming, they keep water levels higher in the polders. Very intricate. And now sea level rise and climate change, they're anticipating 20 centimeters to 85 centimeters over the next 100 years. More extreme storms, so more dangerous weather. Increased erosion, those storms are going to bring higher wave action, is going to wear down that dune or the foreshore. Increased river discharges coming from Germany and France and Belgium. More intense rainfall. They don't expect more, or overall maybe 10% more rainfall on an annual basis, but they're anticipating the rainfall to come in shorter periods. So more discharge coming into the rivers and into the landscape. Periods of drought. So now when you have a drought situation, the rivers dry up, and you have a saltwater wedge pushing into the Dutch Delta, which is a very fertile area, destroying the fisheries, but also destroying all the farmland who's getting their water, the fresh water to irrigate. So you have a tremendous economic impact here. Salt intrusion, subsidence ongoing, this intricate system, and now you have to live there too. So this is a challenge. But the Dutch tell you they're going up to it. They have changed their entire flood protection planning approach since Katrina. Katrina had a major impact upon the Netherlands, and I'll talk about that. Robust protection is crucial. They are not going to give up their major river levees. They're not going to give up their coastal protection. You have to protect the place, and you have to make the investments in there. But I'm going to talk more about these, the smart land use planning and living with water concept that has informed the Dutch approach over the last 20 years. It's now written into Dutch law. And this is the major impact from Katrina. The Dutch are now thinking about how do you evacuate and what do you do after disaster occurs. Because between 1955 and 1995, the Dutch did not think that their infrastructure would fail. They were convinced that it was robust and something bad would not happen. And now Katrina has caused that mentality to think they need to learn from the US. So the Dutch are looking what's going on here. This is, we talk about 1 in 100-year storms in the United States. This is a river flood in the Netherlands. This is 1993. This is a 1 in 300-year flood. 2 years later, 1995, the same flood occurred. So these probabilities are esoteric to some of us, but you had 2 300-year storms in a 3-year period. That shouldn't be possible, but it happened, and it caused the implementation of something called the Room for the River program. 35 projects looking to create more space along the rivers so that you could store water so the areas behind the levees don't flood. And I'm going to talk about a couple of those. This is a polder in the central part of the country. You see the delta on the left-hand side, and upstream you see two cities, Gorinchem and Dordrecht. Each city has 150,000 people in it, so not inconsequential. The river levels are projected to go higher and higher, which is going to endanger those cities. So they had to give back this polder, which was reclaimed in the 1700s. They have to give it back to nature. But you can't kick the farmers off without having a discussion. How do you do this? And how do you maintain, there's a national park down below this, how do you maintain that area for all the recreation and cultural values? They put landscape architects in charge of these projects, most of these Room for the River projects, and they have a design standard. They're trying to reduce the water level by about a foot. Part of the magical part of this program, and this is how you get sentiment and buy-in from the public, is you have to improve the spatial quality of the area. So it's not just infrastructure to reduce flood risk, it's to improve the spatial quality of the area. It's what Garrett talked about. Find out what the communities want in their projects and engage them so they can help. And they did these designs, and they were supposed to get a 30 centimeter drop or 1 foot drop of water level in the river design discharge. And in fact, by doing this project, they got almost triple that. And it's very good, very successful. All they're doing is they're lowering the river level, the river levee up there, and at certain heights of water level in the river, it's just going to flow through this polder. They've had to move 150 houses and about 400 people out of here, or help them move. Land expropriation is not easy in the Netherlands. It's not any easier there than here. You have to do it. They did it. And here's what's going to happen. These are this is a 1 in 1 year situation. It's done at the bottom. This is when the water level is in the river is at 2 meters above where it should be. So I think this is about a 1 in 10 year situation. Sorry, this is a 1 in 5 year situation, and this is a 1 in 25 year situation. So you are going to purposely flood this area to protect people elsewhere. Here's another program. You can see the river coming in, sort of ag land. And that city there is called Zutphen, and that is at major flood risk. It's in the eastern part of the country. And now you're going to see the current situation, and you'll see an animation with the levee setback and what's going to happen under normal sort of springtime situations. And a 1 in 10 or a 1 in 20 year situation is going to do this. And they're storing water there so you don't get it in the delta and cause major flooding. This project is almost completed. Here's another project which is really cool. The city of Nijmegen sits there in the bottom. I wish I had a pointer here. I don't have a pointer, sorry. Hold on. Anyway, the city of Nijmegen sits right where, the next slide will show it better. There's the city of Nijmegen on the bottom. The river channel goes from 1,500 meters or a mile wide to about 400 meters or quarter mile wide. Major flood risk caused by this, because when the snow melts in Germany, it comes down through here. Nijmegen is a city of 300,000 people. What do you do with it? The easiest option was the one on number 1 above that's creating a bypass. Just create a bypass and go around it. The city, however, got involved and said, wait a minute, we have some other ideas. we would like to use the opportunity to create a different living environment, a different engagement with the river. So what they did, you can see this sort of the diagrammatic progression here. They set back the dike along the river, creating a new channel for the water to flow into, an island in the middle of the channel that can be developed, new infrastructure to make it more accessible, and moving forward, it looks like this. So now you have a flood control project that is now being promoted by the local government because now you have more waterfront space. So tax revenues go up, safety is guaranteed because you make the areas on this island flood-proof. Above is the actual situation, below is the design situation. The project is underway, they're about. They've dug the channel, they've started to put some of the infrastructure in. There's another look at it, and here is the 15-year process. These things take time in the Netherlands. Resistance, scariness, you gotta move, got a flood risk, acquiescence. There's a decision made by the government that this project will go forward, but the community needs to tell them what they want to do with it. And that's when the city government got involved, and they said, we need to take the negative to the positive. And they did it. Rotterdam, in the western part of the country, gets more rain from above, more groundwater from below, more river discharge from Germany, and more coastal storm surge from the North Sea. It is not scaring them. They are taking the opportunity of the movement of the port closer to the water. The old harbor was in the center part of the city. It has moved because of the bigger ships. It's moved 30 miles to the west, actually out in the North Sea, hollowing out of the urban core. Climate change gave the city managers an opportunity to redevelop this area in a climate resilient way. And they're doing that. So you see this little skate park idea. This project is under construction, almost completed. It is designed as a skate park, a play area, and it will fill up with water by design whenever a 1 in 10-year storm comes along. Here is the single canal in the center of Rotterdam. Very high value property on each side of this canal. The top right shows you the dry condition. It's a linear park. People play in it. People do it. And 4 or 5 times a year, it looks like it does on the bottom. And the architect of that bridge did that on purpose. That isn't an accident. He wanted to convey to people that during watery situations or flood situations, you have risk. And that's to show that. Here's a situation. This is the top, or the graphic is a design. In fact, what this is, a major redevelopment of an urban area not too far from the Rhine River. Hospital, museums around this area created a parking garage. The city mandated that they store the water from all that new infrastructure, new investment, in the garage during a 1 in 10-year storm. So the garage in a public-private partnership has a chamber in it that fills up with the storm water. When the emergency passes, they pump the water out to the river. So multifunctional infrastructure. This project was paid for primarily by the owner, operator of the garage, not the city. So pretty cool things. It works. I know the city engineer who managed this project, and when they had the first major storm after it was completed, he said he was terrified to push the button because he didn't know if it was going to work. It worked, so it's good. Here's another very typical situation. This is an urban office park going in, watery conditions, but it's going to fill up with water during storms. Here's a pretty cool project. I told you once every 6 years the Netherlands has to manage they have to assess their flood risk. The coast, this is Scheveningen, it's hard for people to say, was below the mandated protection level. They decided they needed to redesign the area but not interrupt the commerce in this major beach access. So they had a couple designers come in, a couple architects come in, and they redesigned this dike. There's a strong new dike under that town. You can see it here on the top column in the middle. Dike covered by sand. The sand now has, the beach is also widened, and they've made this very robust investment in infrastructure, and they've done it in a way that's beautiful. So now they've taken the old seawall and the old sand dune, and they've made it beautiful. So now this area attracts even more people on Sunday afternoons than before, so more tax revenue pays for itself. Very cool project that's completed. This redesign doubled the price, but they know they're going to get their money back in 3 or 4 years because of all the economic activity driven by it. Again, it's very well used. Here's another thing, public-private partnership, beach town. Needed more parking. Everyone was parking in the cities because the city was right close to the beach. The city managers didn't like all that parking in the city, so they are going to have a public-private partnership. They're going to build a parking garage that's going to serve as a revetment in the dune, so you strengthen your dune system, strengthen your coastal protection system, and also you can charge people to park because now they park in the garage and they go to the beach. They don't have to walk through the town. So you alleviate some congestion, you alleviate some annoyance from tourists coming into the city, and also you create this new sort of protection system. And here's one project I want to talk about briefly. It's called the Sand Motor. This is building with nature. This is eco-dynamic design. Sea level rise is going to challenge the Netherlands, as I said, too. There's a lot of research going on in Louisiana, in Vietnam, and other places along, in the world to look at ways to capture the eco-dynamic processes that Mother Nature gives us to increase production or increase amenity. And this is a really cool project. It's called the Sand Engine. Sorry, double slide here. Here you can see in the bottom left what's been going on. The Dutch coast has been retreating over the last 300 years. You can see in the faded area of Egmond on Zee, that yellow thing in the middle is the old church. So now the foundation is underwater because the coastline has retreated. In 1996, the Dutch government mandated that the coastline could no longer retreat. It had to be held in place. How do you do that? With sand supplements. However, in 1990, it would take 6 million cubic meters of sand every year to maintain that. It's not an inconsequential amount. But they're looking in 2000, it doubled. And they were looking at a quadrupling or a tenfold increase of that sand. You can't do that. It's just too costly. So what they decided to do is, with the private sector and with research organizations, is create something called the Sand Motor, a major pile of sand out in the middle of the North Sea, right along the Dutch coast, by design, and then let nature move the sand around. So as opposed to putting 6 million cubic meters of sand on every year, you put 21 million cubic meters of sand on in a 2-month period, and hopefully over 10 or 12 years, the currents are going to distribute that sand. Major cost savings because the dredgers only have to be engaged for 2 months, not for 1 month a year. Major cost savings. And it's going to do a lot of different things. And also create some protection as well as nature and recreation. These are the designs. You can see its deformation over 20 years. Peninsula was constructed in November of 2011. It's August 2011. Here you see the final product, and now you'll start to see the deformation. This is over the last year. You can see it slowly, 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 and you'll watch this thing. This was the model that designed it, or that they used to predict it. Very interesting part or thing about this project is the deformation is going exactly as designed. It is saving a whole lot of money. The protection level has gone up. People have been using this space because this big pile of sand has created more windsurfing opportunity, and more people were going to this area, more birding. So there's an economic model here too. This is a research program, but they're learning some things that are very important. And this kind of a project is very crucial for places along the U.S. East Coast. And I'm going to end up with the issue of the Delta Commission. In 1953, after the last major flood in the Netherlands, they implemented something called the first Delta Commission. And it designed the 40-year project, the Delta Works that I showed you. Katrina scared the Netherlands, as I said. They instituted a second Delta Commission. Did a major study. This is a panel of experts, highly respected. There they are on the left, all different segments of society. And they basically came up with a plan and said, you really do need to prepare for the future. Not 20 years, but 100 years and 200 years. And they've designated the areas, different types of projects need to move forward. And what they said is important. And this is a translation right from the report. So the threat isn't acute, it's important. But you need to start working on this very quickly. And you have 2 challenges, not only a flood risk problem, but a freshwater supply problem in the Netherlands. So you have to deal with this. And the commission, the second Delta Commission, yielded a report. They recommended the appointment of a Delta Commissioner. This is sort of like God in the Netherlands. He is an independent guy. He can do whatever he wants to do. He has a small staff of 20, and he can talk to whatever minister, he can talk to the press, and if he doesn't think that the government's taking him seriously, he'll go and talk to the press. Everyone in the Netherlands is sensitive to flood risk. So if he says something, it scares people, and the government acts. Between 2011 and 2014, they're sort of studying, okay, what kind of projects might we need to implement over the next 20 to 30 years to get us to safety by 2050 and not do things that are going to be maladaptations by 2100. So he's looking for that. Next year, September, he's going to produce his Delta decisions, and those are going to be the projects or the ideas behind it, or the conceptual ideas of how to deal with these various risks. In 2015, his staff, between 2015 and 2020, very methodical process in the Netherlands. They're going to develop the specific projects to deal with the risks that they're identifying and that they're going to try to solve, that they talk about next year. And in the law establishing the Delta Commission, was adopted in 2009, they've already started to reserve 1 billion euros a year for construction and implementation of those projects beginning in 2020. So this is a 30-year program of investment between 2020 and 2050 to deal with some of these things. And they use a number of things that Cynthia talked about this morning, tipping points, and I'll just skip this stuff. And I'm just about out of time. And that's the Netherlands. They take this very seriously. Water management is in their blood. One of the things that's important to understand that sea level rise presents not just threats, but opportunities. We could wish sea level rise and climate change away. That's probably not going to help anyone. So what the Dutch have done is they are using their little country as a test bed for ideas, test bed for adaptation. Some of these projects I showed you can be replicated elsewhere. And they know that Vietnam and Southeast Asia, Africa, Central America, United States, there's going to be flood risk there too. And there's a business model here. That by developing these technologies in the Netherlands, they can help other countries deal with their own flood risk. And this is sort of a mercenary approach to looking at sea level rise. But in fact, it's the way things get done. The private sector has a crucial role in developing the technology that saves people's lives and creates some profit in turn, which creates some revenue for the government, which we all need to build projects. So there's a nice virtuous circle that can occur here, and the Dutch see this, and so they support it. Some of the things we're doing here, we've done a lot of work in Louisiana. Some of the projects we've done, this is a conceptual design. We just released this in September. Conceptual design for Louisiana, we see a very different landscape, a watery, greener landscape in Louisiana than what you have now. It is a wet city. It is a city that has a major flood risk, but it is very dry right now, and we see it differently. Bill's coming up, so I'll stop. Good. And so quite simply, we have a mandate. I'll here on behalf of the Dutch to say the Dutch model is an important one for Americans to follow. The flood risk in the Netherlands is very prevalent. They take it seriously. They make the investments. And I think they show a way forward for certainly East Coast cities. You're going to hear from Norfolk pretty soon. Sandy impacted New York and New Jersey. When your next nor'easter comes along here, what's going to happen here? Miami Beach, we know, is in very deep trouble. So the collaboration aspects between the Dutch and the Americans on these things are important. The Dutch learn from what's happening here because, as I showed you, the weather here is more extreme. And if they're going to get more extreme weather, you guys are the test bed for the Netherlands. So think about that. So the collaboration is good. Thank you.